These little small Class D amps, they're all over the place. So yes, once again, I'm talking about a small little Class D amplifier. This, I'm probably not going to pronounce it right. It's Aiyima. I'm going to say Aiyima. I hope I'm getting that right. A07 Max was sent to me by the manufacturer to review. Most likely, they're probably just going to tell me to keep it because right now it's only retailing for $75. And because I'm assuming they're going to tell me to keep it, I'm going to mark this video as yet another promotional, right? So I don't really like the promotional videos because I know that some people think that just because you're getting something for free means that you're going to say great things about it. I don't do that. I've never done that. And you've seen enough of my videos to know that I don't do that. But with that said, honestly, for like 75 bucks, which is the going rate for this thing right now, it's a really good deal. It's I don't know how they're making it that cheap, and that concerns me. So when I'm testing this thing, I kind of expected at some point I'm going to break it. Recently, I reviewed a pair of the Fosse V3 monoblock amplifiers, and I fried one of them because I was just testing that thing to no end. I mean, 3 hours straight of test tones and multi-tone signals and all sorts of stuff. And I wound up frying one of them. And I tested this one the following day, and I kind of was like, I'm probably going to wind up blowing this thing up too. But this one seemed to handle the abuse better. To me, the downside really comes into the marketing for this thing. If you go on Amazon where you can buy it right now, like I said, about 70, let's say 75 bucks. They say 300 watts plus 300 watts, Class D power amp, bridgeable mono amplifier, 600 watt with 3.5 millimeter line output for passive bookshelf desktop speaker. That's a heck of an explanation there, but let's just stop right here. 300 watts plus 300 watts and you see stereo. So you think, oh, this thing's going to do 300 watts per channel by 2. And it doesn't. Or maybe it does at like max output, but by regular standards, it doesn't. It doesn't even do 300 watts in mono mode by my measurements. So it's very, very misleading to see that. And that really is the only beef that I have with this amplifier. The good thing about this is that it does deliver a pretty decent bit of power. And I'm going to show you some specs for that, or my measurements for that, in a minute. I do like that it seems really well built. It's not a plastic case. It's all metal case. I like the setup you have on the back. There's plenty of room for the power cord. Like the Fosse amps, one of the things that I'm not too fond of about those is that they have the speaker connectors like stacked on top of each other, and the power connector is a little bit harder to get to. It's not like, oh my gosh, there's no way you can do it. But if you have big banana plugs, it's kind of in the way. And I like the staggered output of these. The other thing that I do like about this is, listen. I like that. I like that tactile feel of that little click when you turn the amplifier on. Now on the bottom of it is a little switch for mono or stereo mode. And then you can pretty much just wire this up for whatever you need to. It does have auxiliary output, RCA inputs. The auxiliary output, you can, most likely what you would do is you would run it to a separate subwoofer, but it does not have a high pass filter dedicated to it. Now that's something that I've complained about other small amplifiers, is that when they have a subwoofer output, a dedicated subwoofer output, I would like to see a high pass filter enabled for the mains. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole. I've already said that a few times, but I do wish that were the case. But in this case, they just say aux out. They don't say subwoofer out, and it's not band limited. It is full range signal from what I can tell. So overall, I actually kind of like it. And I think for the current price of around 75 bucks, and I think average it's like around 90 bucks, it's actually a pretty good deal. I had this thing on my bench for at least 2 hours running test tones, multi-tone signal through it, and then just plain being powered on. And when I disconnected it at the end and picked it up, it was just slightly warm. It wasn't even hot. It was just warm. So that's another sign that there is some good engineering, at least in regards to the cooling features. But they do really mislead you with this whole 300 watts plus 300 watts advertising that they got. That's ridiculous. So let's talk about the sound. Okay, so I did some ABX testing actually against the Fosse ZA3, and then I also used the Fosse V3 monoblock. And I'll just be upfront, I didn't hear a difference. Now, the difference is going to be because this amplifier and the ZA3 are both load dependent. The Fozzy V3 is not load dependent. And what that means in a nutshell is that different speaker configurations or different speaker impedances is going to create a different load to the amplifier, and it's going to alter the frequency response that you hear coming out of the speakers, right? And I'm going to show you what I mean here in a second. But in my blind testing using the MoFi Source Point 8s as my reference, I didn't hear any issues. I mean, I was truly blind test, ABX testing. I had no idea what was playing. And when I was setting them up in pairs and trying to listen back and forth, level match properly, I couldn't hear a difference. Now, I have noticed differences in other things, but it seems to me like the high frequency stuff where there's not a big shift in the overall decibel output or change. I haven't noticed that. So while I'm talking about that, let me show you exactly what I mean by using some data. In the ideal world, the amplifier should only amplify the signal. It shouldn't alter the signal to any degree, unless that's specifically what you're looking for, maybe a 2 amp or something of that nature, then that's a different conversation. But I believe that an amp should just amplify the signal that's being input, and it should not change based on the load that it's driving, aka the speaker that it's driving. So for a reference, what I'm showing here is this black line right through here. That would be 0 decibels. And let's say that that's your baseline. All amplifier frequency response should have no change, right? That's your baseline, no change. But what happens is when you present different loads to this particular amp and some other amplifiers, the response does change. So here's what we have when we have an 8 ohm load. You can see that there's about 0.75 decibel peak at around 22 kilohertz. You're probably not going to hear this, but note that it is a swing that starts at around maybe like 4 kilohertz or so. So you've got that broad region of swing there. What happens when you use a 4 ohm static load? Well, now it's kind of going the other way. You're down to about 1 decibel at about 22 kilohertz. Or if you want to go to 10 kilohertz, you're down about maybe 0.2 decibels. This is how most amplifiers are tested, but what I like to do is to do something that some other outlets do, such as Stereophile and Soundstage Network, and that is to test using a simulated speaker load. If I introduce a simple load, which is, a simple kind of two-way design with maybe a nominal 8 ohm load, you can see that we've got some swings going through here. Now, it's possible that these are going to be audible depending on the music, depending on the situation. I didn't hear a difference in my blind testing. Now what happens when you introduce a more complex load, closer to a 4 ohm nominal load, but harder to drive? You get this. See, this peaking right around 2K is similar to the simple load, but the other thing is that you've got a broader region from about 3K to about 13K or so, where it's about a half a decibel peak, centered around 7 to 8 kilohertz. That's also something that you might hear. It's not a huge peak in overall level, but it's enough that you might notice it. Again, I didn't notice it, but it's okay to think that someone might if the conditions are right. But I would not trust myself to do a cited A-B comparison and solely believe that the differences I'm hearing are due to this. I would only take that information if somebody said, I did an ABX blind test and I passed it 100% of the time. I knew which amplifier was playing. That didn't happen for me. One thing I don't like is a noisy amplifier. Like if I plug up my speakers to an amplifier and all I hear is that drives me insane. So one thing I like to do is just do a baseline noise test. The red is the noise floor of the hardware that I'm using to measure this gear. And then the yellow is the noise floor of the amplifier itself, at least on one of the channels. And you're down about 100 to 120 dBV or so. That's really low. I don't think you're going to hear that at all. So to me, this is a non-issue. So now let's look at the power rating, what I obtained in stereo mode, and then I'm going to show you mono mode in a second. For the 8 ohm load, you go to about maybe 95 watts or so before you start increasing in distortion. At around 1% THD, you're at around maybe 130 watts, give or take. With 4 ohm, you get to about maybe 160 watts, give or take, at 1% THD. But then when you get up a little bit up here, this thing goes into protect and it basically shuts the outputs off, mutes them, And that way it protects the amplifier from being overdriven. If I look at a simple load, it's close to the 8 ohm nominal load, so maybe just a little bit more power. And then if I go with a complex load, probably more typical of a harder to drive speaker, you can see that you hit 1% THD at around 280, 290 watts or so. Now, maybe that's where they're coming up with this 300 watts, but they say 300 watts at 4 ohm in their manual. I'm gonna read it. 315 watts using the 48 volt 5 amp power supply at 4 ohm. I'm using the 48 volt 5 amp power supply. This is what came with the amplifier. So I'm not hitting that 300 watts by 300 watt spec. What about in mono mode? 8 ohm gets me to about at 1%, kind of close to the same as what we saw a second ago, maybe just a little bit higher. Let me go back real fast. Yeah, maybe just a little bit higher at 8 ohm in mono mode. But the 4 ohm mono mode gets us to about 250 watts or so, which compared to 4 ohm in dual channel mode gets you maybe about 70 watts more output at 4 ohm. That's pretty good. All in all, there's really not a lot to say about these amplifiers. I mean, I could go on and I could just talk about sound and soundstage and do all that stuff. But honestly, the only thing that really, truly matters, at least to me, is it noisy? Does it alter the frequency response? And does it make the power I need it to make for my speakers and my listening room and my distance? And if this thing, if let's say like 100 watts or so is adequate for you and your listening distance, which for most people in a small to medium sized room, you're probably going to be okay with that, then this amplifier should do the trick. And at price of 90 bucks regular, 75 or so on sale right now, it's hard for me to not recommend it, honestly. But I'll leave it up to you, what you think about it. It seems like it's built well, and if I have a friend looking for it, then I would say, hey, yeah, check this out for a desktop amplifier. Hopefully that helps you out, helps you make a decision if you're kind of on the fence about this versus something else. I'll just be honest with you. Overall, I kind of like this more than the Fozzy stuff that I'm seeing out right now, and I've had hands-on experience, but it's up to you. You know, the biggest thing to me is just the build quality, and I like that. It does pretty good power, but it does not hit that 300 watts. And I think that's hopefully Aiyima will come down off of that, because I just, the way that that's marketed, I don't like it. It seems disingenuous, if I'm being honest. But at any rate, I will end this review here. And if you enjoyed it, please leave a thumbs up and do all that kind of cool stuff. If you would like to join me at patreon.com to get some insider information of things that I'm testing and that kind of stuff, then please do so. Join me at patreon.com/ErinsAudioCorner. Otherwise, if you'd like to help out and you don't want to pay directly, but you buy things through Amazon or Crutchfield or Best Buy or whatever, I have generic affiliate links in my description of the video below. And if you don't mind, just click one of those generic affiliate links when it's time for you to buy whatever it is, a TV, a refrigerator, new socks, new shoes, whatever. And follow that link and buy whatever you need to. I do earn a small commission off of that, and that helps me keep doing what I'm doing, and I do appreciate it. I will talk to y'all later. Take care. Peace.